early stages as I was shifting really from being a Caribbeanist and to start thinking as an Africanist, to really start thinking about those connections between the Caribbean and West Africa. I'm deeply interested in the globalization of West African religion and how Vodun in particular is becoming increasingly more popular among a increasingly more diverse group of people, from people in the Caribbean to white Americans who are traveling to West Africa to be initiated, to an increasingly diverse number of Africans themselves who are becoming initiated into these religions. So at the core of my research, what I'm really interested in is the mechanisms by which indigenous African religions have begun to globalize. This particular, what I'm going to be talking to you about today is a very ethnographically rich section that I've done on ritual. So what I'm essentially looking at is the ways in which ritual itself transforms human bodies into religious agents, or humans into religious agents, and how that then helps to create and encourage the globalization of West African religions. So we'll be looking at a very particular ritual initiation. We'll be a bit reflexive here. I'll be looking at my own initiation into Fa. Those of you who are more familiar with the Yoruba literature may know it as Ifa, into the divination cult, and looking at the ways in which the ritual actually transforms the person and creates what I call an occult ontology, these kind of hidden, mysterious changes, magical changes that happen to the body that transforms people into religious agents. And at the end, I essentially end up arguing that secrecy, when we think of secrecy, we think of religious secrecy as being a restrictive force, something that controls information, something that keeps people from having information. We see it as something that is an expression of power, and all those things may be true, but at the end of the day, I argue that it's precisely through secrecy that Vodun is becoming global. So we'll jump right into the ethnography. A week before my initiation, Jean, a man who would become my mentor, performed divination to ask Fa, the oracular spirit of destiny, how to prepare for my journey into Fa's sacred forest. As he always did when consulting Fa, Jean sat on a straw mat with his back against the far wall of his 10 by 30 earthen building that he used to receive clients and to perform rituals for Fa. In the spot where John sat for an immeasurable number of consultations over the years, the mud wall had begun to lose its red earth color, leaving behind a ghostly black image of John's shape. "Sit here to my left," he instructed, pointing to a low wooden stool. After I balanced my body onto the wobbly seat, I dropped 100 CFA into John's hand, as was customary, and almost immediately Jean began to sing Fa's praise. Next slide. After a few moments, he tossed his divining chain, these chains here that you see in the picture, onto the ground in front of him to reveal which of the 256 signs known as Du that Fa would speak. I watched intensely as Jean's aklekan, the word for divining chain, fell onto the smooth but cracked cement floor in front of him. The staccato rhythm created when the 8 seed halves crashed against the surface echoed off the walls of the small enclosed room. "Otoropan Obara," Jean announced. Saying the name of the Du aloud makes the sign real, and according to Jean, unchangeable. Before the Du's name is spoken aloud, Jean contended that the Du, and therefore the individual's destiny for which the Du was cast, was still fragile and uncertain. Speaking the Du's name brought the sign into being. Fa says that before your initiation, you must offer sacrifices to Sakpata, Ebioso, and Dan. These Vodun will support you, he says. They will make you strong. This is important, he said to me, with a seriousness in his voice that I had never heard before. "Okay, what do I need to do?" I asked him. To answer my question, Jean once again turned to his aklekan and began asking Fa about the details of the sacrifices I needed to perform. A guinea hen to Sakpata, a rooster to Hebioso, and a white goat to Dan. For Jean, a devotee offering a sacrifice was a way to ensure that initiation candidates took their first steps into the sacred forest fully prepared with the Vodun's support. The word Vodun in this context, by the way, is a word that essentially translates to God, spirit, or divinity. And because of colonialism, it's become the word for the actual religion. The actual religion is called Vodun Sinsan, which would essentially translate to worshiper of the spirits. So Vodun, when I'm talking about Vodun, I'm talking essentially about spirits here. Within a couple days, I managed to purchase the prescribed animals, along with some red palm oil, a dozen kola nuts, and a bottle of gin. Animals in tow, I walked proudly into Jean's cinderblock house and announced, "Jean, I'm ready to make the sacrifices. I have everything we need." Within a couple hours, Jean and I, along with a few of his sons and apprentices, were walking into the forest to perform my sacrifices. After he had offered the birds to Sakpata and Hebioso, we started down the long forest path which led to Dan. Within a few minutes, we arrived at Dan's small public grove. To the back of the forest clearing was an earthen mound that covered the leaves and other hidden objects that were used to incarnate the spirit. On the mound, which protected Dan's unseen powers, rested the visible portion of his shrine, a few terracotta pots. And you can click the slide, and then you can see what I'm talking about here. Sorry. The ritual vessels were coated with years of offerings. Countless white chicken feathers and dried kola nuts had been left on the shrine on the forest floor, each indexing times that individuals came to Dan, some with their pains and others with their joys. I was ready to offer a goat to Dan and contribute to the ever-growing unfinished quality of the shrine. Romar, Jean's eldest son, offered a bundle of leaves to the white goat that I had led into the forest on a frayed hemp cord. The goat almost immediately took a bite of the leaves, thereby signaling Dan's acceptance of the sacrifice. Before I knew it was happening, Romar had picked the goat up off the ground, tied its leaf-filled mouth shut, and bound its legs to keep her from kicking. "Speak a message into the goat's ear," Jean coached. "Tell her what message you want her to bring to your ancestors." I leaned down and whispered a message into the goat's ear, a message of good wishes to my long-dead grandparents and to my uncle, who had just passed away unexpectedly a few weeks prior. I'd been unable to travel back to the United States for his funeral, and this moment helped me to overcome feelings of guilt. It was a welcome alternative to saying goodbye to him in person. As I stood up, Jean jolted me from this personal moment with my remembered dead by placing a knife in my hand. "Here," Jean said, "you need to learn how to do this if you're going to be a diviner." I hesitated. I did not think I was ready to take the goat's life. I had, for the most part, grown up blissfully removed from the consequences of eating meat. Using his finger, Jean made a slashing mark on the goat's throat. "Just cut here. Do it quick," Jean instructed. I took a deep breath and adjusted my grip on the knife, and in a final act of hesitation, I rested the blade on the goat's throat for longer than Jean was comfortable. "Just do it. Don't think about it," Romar offered. With Romar's encouragement and under Jean's watchful gaze, I made one swift downward gesture with the knife and opened the goat's jugular. The goat was silent as her blood poured from the sacrificial gash and onto Dan. In a moment of shock and awe, one could see the sunlight as it creeped through the thick forest canopy and reflect off the wet blood that now covered the shrine in an almost luminescent red sheen. With the sacrifice complete and with Dan fed, Jean took a moment to teach me his next lesson. "Give Gu some palm oil. Pour it on the knife. You have to thank the metal." With that, Dan had accepted my sacrifice, and I managed to show Jean that I could feed the spirits that he devoted his life to serve. Later that evening, we all consumed the goat and took Dan's ashe, or divine power, into our bodies. I was now ready to be initiated. On a Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, Jean's teenage son, Auguste, and I sat on the short cement wall that bordered the small cinder block building that housed some of the village's most important spirit shrines. We both wore a large bubu and wrapped our waists in yards of multicolored cloth. After a couple hours, Jean and the other diviners joined us and began to prepare to escort Auguste and me into the sacred forest. Auguste and I were each handed a short fiber rope, which we were supposed to use to guide the young blonde she-goat that was tied to the other end. But before we were able to fully control the goats, a woven fiber cage with 4 chickens and a rooster was precariously balanced on our heads. We were ready to greet the forest. Pascal, Jean's 98-year-old father, led the way as we followed him. Jean and 10 or so other diviners into the forest. Slide, and you can see. I was a bit busy, by the way, when this ritual was happening, so these aren't photos of the actual ritual that I'm talking about. But they're photos of a ritual that happened that mirrors the one that I'm talking about. With each step, we progressed closer to the secret. Our bodies, unbeknownst to us, began to change. At this point, steps could not be untaken, and sights could not be unseen. As we approached the symbolic center of the Spirit's divine power, our bodies had become part of the Vodun's social world. We could hear the voices of men who were singing Fa's praise. Their forest melodies were punctuated by the clickety-clack of the small iron bells that hung from the Fa Saint, which led our way. Slide. The Fa Saint, which you see here, is a metal staff that stands about 4 or 5 feet tall. Its top is capped with a 6-inch metal disc, and in some cases, a iron-forged image of a rooster. There's not a rooster on this particular one. Some of them have them, some of them don't. It's truthfully just a matter of cost at this point. So those kind of things have been eliminated by many of the Fa Saint, although some of the older ones still maintain that image. And there are art historians like Henry Drull who have shown that people have indicated to him that it was a hawk and not a rooster. And people have different kinds of reasons as to what bird it is, but it varies a little bit. The staff's shaft is adorned with a dozen or more cone-shaped bells and a metal hook that points upward, from which the head of sacrificial roosters are hung as a constant reminder to Death that he must stay away. Art historian Henry Drull has shown that the Fa Saint, in Yoruba, if you're familiar with the Yoruba literature, this is the Opa Oshun, the diviner's staff. And it looks a bit different in Fawnland because the top part of this is mimicking fawn funerary staffs. So it's kind of an aesthetic that's been carried in, but there's slight differences. For example, the hook, like this hook that you see here, and these bells aren't visible in a funerary staff called an asen. So the asen, the fasen. Henry Drull has shown that the fasen represents the power of the diviner to conquer death and acts as a weapon against death and other destructive forces. Additionally, the fasen indexes the unification of the diviner and Fa as a single synergetic force, when brought together through initiation, has the power to conquer death and adversity. The fasen's power over death was exemplified as we advanced, stopping at each of the crossroads that we encountered, so that the fasen's enduring power could chase away death from everyone present, and especially from Auguste and me, as our lack of initiation made us particularly vulnerable. As we passed through our third set of crossroads, it was clear that we had already experienced too much to turn back. With only the night's darkness and the depth of the forest ahead of us, the transformation had already begun. Eventually, we found ourselves at the sacred forest's entrance, and the current resting place of Badu, the female Vodun, who through the use of witchcraft, or azeh, is believed to have given birth to the universe. Again, for the Yoruba scholars, Badu is a faunification, if you will, of the Yoruba Ibaudu, which is the calabash of Odu, the Orisha who gave birth to the universe and who is in handmaidens with Ifa and Orunmila. So Badu is the faun version of Ibaudu. Slide. Because of Badu's perceived occult danger, the trail that led into the forest is obscured by a blanket of shredded palm fronds. The palm fronds separate the sacred forest from the everyday lived forest, thereby empowering the sacred forest with presence and the ability to affect the ways in which humans exist in the world. Put another way, the palm fronds give the sacred forest an ontology that is at once dangerous and transformative. To the right of the path, slide, sits a small legba in a sun-baked terracotta pot that's only brought to this occasion during ritual events. When this legba is made, it looks very much like the legbas or the legwas that are made in Lukumi. It's actually a little head. This legba has been used for so many years that you can't see the head anymore. It's just kind of this accumulation of sacrifice and offerings that have piled on top of it. And this particular version is mobile because it comes in and out of the forest only when the forest is being used for initiation is it brought in. And then when it's not being used, it's put inside the ritual house where they keep fa. So it's essentially fa's legba, the legba that opens the gate for fa. When legba guarded the passageway into the forest, everyone knew that Badu was present, adding both to the forest's power and danger. Before we could appreciate the forest's potency, Jean offered a rooster to legba and poured water and orange Fanta on at the grove's entrance, to ask Badu permission to return the following day for our initiations. Breaking a kola nut into its 4 natural segments, Jean tossed the kola nut onto the ground and asked the forest if our offerings were accepted. 2 of the kola nut's lobes landed facing down and 2 facing up, indicating a strong and balanced yes. Good, Jean announced. The offerings were accepted, and we can come back tomorrow. Auguste and I had both received confirmation from Badu, who from a safe and unknowable distance had agreed to accept us into her sacred grove. With each ritual movement, whether it be physical steps or ritual checkpoints, our bodies changed, and we were protected from the danger and risk that emanated from Badu. These ritual steps imbued us with the social capital that we needed to overcome the resistance that kept us away from Badu and the divine and social power she conferred. Only through ritual were we able to navigate through Badu's thick aura of secrecy that was designed paradoxically to resist our entrance. With permission given, on the following day, we could return. This brief but important part of the initiation ritual effectively separates new initiation candidates from the community's non-initiates by bringing them to the forest's edge. The forest's secrets beckoned us and pulled at our curiosity. As Auguste and I peered into the dark forest, our liminality became clear. While ritual allowed us to stand where, until now, we had not been allowed to stand, the palm frond curtain warned us against entering the forest completely. The secrets that were shrouded by the forest would have to wait. Until then, our imaginations would only contribute to the secret's growing strength. We had to admit that as badly as we both wanted to see Badu, we were just not ready. Our bodies were too vulnerable. We were ritually and therefore ontologically unprepared to go any further. Don't look into the forest too long. You'll both go blind. You're not ready to see Badu, Jean said, catching Auguste and me staring blankly down the path that led to Badu's inner sanctum. Can you go back one? If you look very carefully in this photo, there's another curtain back here, and that's another layer to that forest. So this is a layer of warning here, and then there's another one back there. So we were kind of like trying to figure out what was back there, and when he caught us, and he chastised us both. So you can go ahead and advance it again. Being initiated into Fa means undergoing those ontological changes that will allow us to move safely through Badu's dangerous aura of secrecy. The gradual steps towards the forest, the asking of permission to enter the forest, and the warnings against peering into the forest all coalesce to add value and social power to ritual secrecy in Vodun. Through a process that Paul Christopher Johnson has called secretism, or the active milling, polishing, and promotion of a secret's reputation, one can see that our slow exposure to ritual secrecy empowered us at the same time that it also empowered the spirit's social efficacy. Successfully negotiating one's way through ritual secrecy, but not necessarily knowing the secret, becomes the force by which Bhutanese authorize foreign initiates to act as priests as they are transformed into vessels for ashe, or what Johnson has called the body as secret. In this way, an initiate's body, through a gradual and ritualized exposure to secrecy and divine power, is transformed, and not necessarily into someone with a new identity or status, but as someone who is a contained secret themselves. Our visit to the forest edge prepared us to receive Fa's sacred palm nuts, called Fadiquin, and these are the Ikin in Ifa. The transformation that an initiate's sacred palm nuts undergo during one's initiation parallels the ontological changes that are experienced by the devotee themselves. That is to say, in Fa's case, both the devotee and Fa are initiated so that they may both be imbued with ashe and spiritual authority. The word ashe, I should say, is a bit complicated. I'm roughly translating it here to divine power, and that's grossly inadequate. In Fon, the word ashe has two meanings. It means both power, and it means right. It's like the right to do something, and the power to do something. So presumably, when you have the right to do something, you have the power to do something, and when you have the power to do something, you have the right to do something. So it just kind of lets you in on you can kind of see linguistically how people are connecting these two kinds of concepts. So ritual not only confers you with divine power, it also confers you with the right to do initiations yourself, or to initiate others. So it's kind of a dual meaning within this word that's happening during an initiation. Successfully venturing into the sacred forest and completing the ritual ensure that both Fa and the initiate are transformed in ways that help them to realize their full potential as they become part of each other's physical and spiritual selves. The next day at sunrise, Jean woke us up from our sleep in Fa's house and asked us to confirm our desire to enter the forest. "Are you ready? Are you sure you want to do this?" Jean asked. "Yes," Auguste and I both responded almost in perfect unison. With our eyes still adjusting to the early morning light, Jean ushered us into the ritual room he used in the village for Fa veneration. The two front-facing windows were closed and tightly latched. Only the door, slightly ajar, allowed a little sunlight to trickle into the dark room. Illuminated by a dusty beam of light, I could see the straw mat in the center of the room was clearly covered in bundles of sacred and powerful plants. The heat combined with the scent of livestock and with the leaves' natural fragrances, some sweet and some pungent, making it difficult to breathe. Against the back wall, where light could scarcely touch, I could barely make out 4 small palm nut-filled terracotta dishes whose rounded bottoms caused them to wobble against the slick cement floor. I was certain that these were the palm nuts that would accompany Auguste and me into the sacred forest. Slide. Romar and a few of Jean's other apprentices poured fresh well water into a large blue plastic container that was embossed with "Made in China" on the outer brim. Soon afterwards, everyone began to sing magical songs that purportedly had the ability to awaken the leaves' hidden powers. One by one, the leaves were crushed into the water to release their natural oils and spiritual essences. By the end of the ritual, the water had been stained a bright, almost fluorescent green. Our palm nuts, known as Fadiquin, were washed in this magical bath and then placed back into their terracotta dishes, refreshed and empowered by the leaves' ashe. Those present offered Fa cola nuts, gin, and an orange Fanta. Auguste and I were given a small piece of the bitter cola nut to consume in communion with Fa. When I bit into the cola nut, my mouth filled with the nut's distinctive dry, bitter taste that was only alleviated when I took a sip of sweet Fanta and a mouthful of gin. You notice it wasn't the other way around. Auguste, of course, enjoyed the cola nut and drank the Fanta and gin, not as a reprieve, but just as part of the process. After everyone had a taste of the cola nut, Jean added salt and pepper to Fa's terracotta dishes and quickly filled them with just enough red palm oil so as to barely miss submerging the tops of the palm nuts. In quick succession, 2 hens, one white and one beige, were sacrificed. Their blood poured from the gashes on their throats and into the dishes, where it mixed with the bright orange color of the palm oil. The palm nuts were washed clean of the palm oil and blood and taken alongside Auguste and me into the forest. Following behind the Fa Saint, Jean and his diviners once again led Auguste and me into the forest. After sacrificing another rooster to Legba, we approached the Fa Saint, which was now planted in the ground just outside the forest entrance. Each diviner present, along with Auguste and me, was marked by having a palm frond tied onto our left wrist and left ankle. Just as the forest had been demarcated by palm fronds, now they were also used to demarcate our bodies as secret, powerful, and dangerous. Put your left hand on the Fa Saint and put your foot at its base, Jean instructed. Forming a symbolic community of diviners who were joined in their ability to speak to Fa, each of the diviners who were present placed their hands on top of ours and their feet at the base, with the Fa Saint passing between their big toe and second toe, one on top of the other. Buried in the ground at Fa Saint's base were our Fa de Queen. For 10 minutes or more, we held on to the top of the Fa Saint while Fa, buried under the ground, seemingly grasped the base himself under the pressure of our feet. Connected by the Fa Saint, we all sang the names of Fa's 16 primary divinatory patterns. At this moment, Fa and the diviner began to merge, linked together by the earth and by the power of the Fa Saint. Find your Fa de Queen, Jean shouted. They were buried underneath the Fa Saint. Auguste and I quickly fell to our knees and began to dig with our hands at the Fa Saint's base. One by one, the Fa de Queen emerged from the earth, and one by one they were collected in a small calabash and rinsed with Badu's powerful, watery medicine. Enacting an important story in Yoruba mythology, whereby Orunmila sacrifices a crying rooster to chase away death, a rooster was sacrificed to the Fa Saint, but only after its tail feathers were plucked and therefore made to feel pain, to divert death's attention from everyone present. With our Fa de Queen washed and fed, Legba placated and death's dangerous gaze diverted, Auguste and I were finally ready to enter the forest. We knelt at the forest edge and in front of us, stopping just a few feet before the forest entrance. There were 2 columns of evenly spaced grapefruit-sized mounds of dirt, 8 to the left and 8 to the right, with a larger mound at the apex between the 2 columns. Each of the small mounds embodied one of the 16 major du found in the Fa corpus, and resting on each of the 16 red soil mounds was a single bright white cowrie shell. Before Auguste and I were able to thoroughly survey our surroundings, we were blindfolded. Can you see, Jean asked. Too afraid and too anxious to say anything else, both of us just said no. Because I was the oldest, go ahead, Jean began with me and then moved to Auguste, moving left to right. He pressed our foreheads into the small mounds, effectively pushing the cowrie shell into the earth to pave the dew for passage into the forest. We ended by laying on our stomachs between the 2 columns, our arms crossed. There we go. Our arms crossed under our chins, with the entrance of the forest just a few feet away from our faces. We were now closer than we had ever been to Badu. Just as the diviners had just placed pressure on Fa a few moments before at the Fa Saint, using his foot, Jean now put pressure on our backs as we hugged the earth and prepared to enter the forest. Okay, stand up, an unfamiliar voice shouted. Upon rising to our feet, our blindfolds were removed. Tilt your head back, Romar commanded. Romar held our eyes open and flushed them with badusin. Badusin just means badu water. Sin is also the word that means medicine, so you could translate it to badu's medicine, depending on how you want to translate the term. The same shea butter and snail blood fortified herbal mixture that has been used to wash our Fadi queen a few moments prior. He used the red tail feather of an African gray parrot to channel the leaf water directly into our eyes. It's worth noting that there has been some cases in the United States among practitioners of Santeria Lukumi where rituals like this are actually exceptionally dangerous because people are catching meningitis from the snails. And the giant snails are also illegal in the United States because they're really horrible pests and destroy crops. Yet, because they're so important to this particular ceremony, it's one of the things that's problematizing the globalization. So people are using other types of snails for this ritual, but they're saying that those snails aren't effective. People are buying smuggled snails or smuggling snails in themselves and putting their health at risk because of possible infections and meningitis because of the macerated snails that are in the water. One by one, all the initiated diviners who would be entering the sacred forest washed their eyes with the same medicine to prevent Badu's power from causing blindness or even death. The mixture, however necessary, stung my eyes. Auguste seemed unaffected. For him, this initiation was just as much about his masculinity as it was about learning his destiny. Auguste had more to prove socially than I did. Before walking past the palm frond barrier and into the forest, I rubbed my eyes to find relief from the burning. Don't do that. It's supposed to hurt. It means the leaves are working, Jean reassured me. Fighting back the pain, Auguste and I both smiled at Jean and waited for his instructions. With Badusin running from my swollen, bloodshot eyes and down our cheeks, we were finally ready to receive Fa's forest and walk into the space that had up until now been forbidden. After entering the forest on our knees, Jean removed our blindfolds and led us into the forest's inner grove that was hidden behind a second palm frond curtain. "This is Badu's home," Jean announced. For the first time, we had seen Fa's secret. Badu sat in the center of the small grove. Auguste and I knelt before Badu and watched as Jean and his other apprentices tended to the spirit who is believed to have given birth to the world. I could not help but feel overcome by the symbolic potency of this space. It was as if we had sat at the center of the universe from which humanity and the spirits were both born. Each of the rituals and conversations that Auguste and I had experienced up until now empowered this moment. I imagined a parallel ritual happening in the spirit world. In my mind's eye, I watched as Badu initiated Fa into our mysteries, and I thought about how Fa and the other Vodun must have consumed the sacrificial blood in the same way that we would consume the initiatory meat the ritual had provided us. Just as quickly as it started, the ritual was over and the secret revealed. Our bodies were changed forever. If we decided never to participate in Vodun again, we could not unsee Badu or unexperience our initiations. We were forever changed. With Badu placated, we left the inner grove of the forest and moved to the forest's larger meeting area. "Sit here. Pick up your Fa and divine," Jean commanded, pointing to a small mound of dirt. In front of the mound of dirt on which we were supposed to sit was another mound of dirt about 18 inches wide and perfectly flat. "This is the forest's fate. You will draw the dew on here," Jean explained. Slide. Outside the forest, the fate, which is the Yoruba, the opon, is a wooden divining board from which a diviner draws the dew that are revealed during divination. The edge of the board is usually intricately carved with images that reflect stories from mythology or important lessons that are revealed by the dew. Indexing the cross-section of the calabash from which the universe is believed to rest, the smooth, flat center of the board on which a diviner inscribes the dew, is simultaneously the center of the universe and the mythical plane of creation. So I want to say that not all diviners use boards that are as beautifully carved as this. There are, poverty has made it so people aren't able to afford boards like this. They're very expensive to hire a carver to carve them. Many people who I met simply used a piece of cardboard that had been cut out in a circle, and were divining on cardboard that had been drawn on, designs had been drawn on them as well. In the forest, though, none of this was used, of course. It was done straight on the actual soil. In the forest, everything was simpler, or as Jean described it, in the way that God intended. Even as an outsider, I appreciated the cumulative and ephemeral power that came from inscribing the dew, which revealed my personal destiny onto the forest floor, where hundreds of diviners before me had done the same. In this way, the forest's divine power accumulates spiritual potency and effectiveness over time. The power attributed to accumulation in Vodun has also been noted by art historian Dana Rush, who argues that accumulation and an object's forever unfinished nature, such as the never finished forest floor on which dew are inscribed endlessly, are at the roots of Vodun's, quote, aesthetic power. We were about to perform divination for the first time to determine under which of the 256 signs our priesthoods would be born. I clenched the 16 palm nuts in my hand and began to ask Fa to disclose my dew. The dew would reveal insights into my personal destiny, which taboos I must respect, and which of the Vodun were most important to me as a priest. As I removed the palm nuts from their calabash dish, I began to feel nervous. When Jean performed divination, he made the process seem effortless and elegant. There was a certain beauty to the way he manipulated the Fadiquin. I knew from the way my hands were beginning to sweat that my attempt would be disastrous. I did not have Jean's 40 years of experience, nor Auguste's cultural habitus that he cultivated as a child, pretending to perform divination using small stones or nuts that he found on the forest floor. For me, divination was truly foreign. My sweaty palms did not make this complex task any easier. As my left palm met my right, 4 of the Fadiquin fell on the ground. Jean picked them up, placed them in my hand, and quietly said, again. After half a dozen clumsy attempts, I finally started to acclimate to the feel of the palm nuts in my hand. While my efforts were not as graceful as Jean's, I managed to reveal my sign. Call the name, Tim. It's not there until you call the name. Iworiogbe, I announced. You must trust Fa and live a peaceful life, Jean's father proclaimed. Fa had begun to reveal himself to me little by little. I would start to learn what it means to become a diviner. After learning our signs, Jean shaved Auguste's and my heads, and the removal of one's hair, which also occurs to mourn the death of a family member, simultaneously marks the ritual death that one's uninitiated self and their birth as a new diviner. Through the relationship with Fa, one can now shed their past and overcome their future struggles. This portion of the ritual marked the first time that initiation was inscribed physically onto our bodies. Our shaven heads, which would stay with us for at least a couple weeks, would signal to the community that we were recently initiated. Hold the bundle with your hand, Jean instructed, as he balanced a heavy 6-foot bundle of materials on our freshly shaven heads. We're going to the lake to finish your initiation. Balancing on our heads the bundles, which I estimated to have weighed at least 15 pounds, we followed Jean and the other diviners to the lake, where our bodies were ritually bathed and wrapped in new white cloth. Our heads, where our souls are believed to reside, were covered with kaolin and marked with a single strand of Fa's glass beads, which alternated in green and yellow. In the middle of our foreheads, tucked behind the beaded strand, Jean placed a single red feather of an African gray parrot. This is to ward off jealousy. Don't lose it, Jean said as he secured the feather. Feeling refreshed from this ritual bath, Auguste and I followed Jean and the other diviners back to the village. When we emerged from the forest, we found the entire village awaiting our return. We were greeted with cheers and with invitations to join the rest of the community in dance. Before dark, we washed our fa one final time and offered him a she-goat. After the goat was sacrificed and butchered, the goat's head and portions of the meat were left to rest on our fa de queen so that it could absorb Fa's divine power. The fa de queen were covered and then draped in palm fronds, thereby marking Fa's final transformation into a secret himself. Béninois Vaudouisans described Fa initiation as, quote, receiving the forest. Not only do initiates receive Fa's secrets that are hidden deep in the forest, but the forest also becomes a permanent fixture of the diviner's being. For Béninois, such as Auguste, receiving the forest gives them access to important social spaces that reinforce their gender and their positions within their families. After his initiation, Auguste returned to school and lived his life relatively unchanged. The initiation allowed for him to train with his father to become a diviner. It gave him the social permission to enter the forest with the other men, and it made it safe for him to eat Badu's sacrificial meat. But as Jean told all his initiates, this is just the beginning. Some of Jean's sons became serious students and even begun to develop their own reputations as diviners, while others left the village to study at the university. Regardless of their practical proficiency, when they were all home, they were all initiates. They retained their inalienable right to enter the forest and consume Badu's dangerous ashe. With foreign spiritual seekers paying thousands of dollars for initiations, it is uncommon for Béninois to become initiated. It is not uncommon for Béninois to become initiated, drawn by the promise of wealth. The price, everybody always asks me how much. It varies really dramatically, anywhere from $1,500 to, I met one person who paid $10,000. So it's quite a range, and it's a dramatic sliding scale. So it varies quite a bit. Even so, for most Béninois I met, initiation was about their spiritual safety and their development into social adults who were in total control of their own destinies. It was not about a social commitment to their becoming adept diviners so much as it was a social commitment to their families and to the fulfillment of the destinies that their initiation would reveal. Foreign spiritual seekers tend to experience ritual initiation from a different reference point. While most of the foreigners I met asserted that they sought initiation to help them to, quote, develop a relationship with divinity, most of them, if not all of them, were also influenced by capitalism. Coming from societies such as the United States that are deeply invested in global capitalism, foreign spiritual seekers often talk about initiation as a product. One evening, Kevin, an American spiritual diviner in his 40s, spiritual seeker in his 40s, who paid $2,500 to receive Badu, lamented to me, "I paid $2,500 for Badu, and my initiator won't even teach me how to make the shrine. I feel like I'm being scammed. How am I going to make my money back if I can't make Badu for other people? No one is going to take me seriously as a priest." What Kevin didn't quite grasp was that most Béninois diviners didn't know how to make Badu. In fact, of Jean's 20 or more apprentices, only Romar, his eldest son, had even begun to learn the difficult and purportedly dangerous process. While Kevin believes he paid for the right to know, most Béninois diviners go their entire lives not knowing the rituals nor the materials required to incarnate Badu into her shrine. As a matter of fact, while I was there, Jean had received, on 3 separate occasions, Béninois people coming to him, asking him to make the shrine for them. Even though they were initiates, they didn't know how to do it. And his family had a very positive reputation for making this shrine in a particularly powerful way. So he was often hired by Béninois people who didn't know how to make the shrine to construct the shrine for them. For initiates such as Kevin, the transformation that ritual provides them has nothing to do with their commitment to their families and much to do with their international success as priests and diviners. On another occasion, Kevin told me of his plans to build a website once he was back in the United States so that he could attract students and bring them to Benin to be initiated. Kevin, like so many foreign diviners, embarked on initiation to validate his religious authority so that he could initiate others. By contrast, Beninese initiates tended to place religious authority in the hands of the local gerontocracy, who saw ritual proficiency not as a product of initiation, but as something that is generally garnered gradually along with age and with wisdom over long periods of time. Jean was about in his mid-50s, and even then his father was always there, who was at the time in his late 90s, was always there and very quick to even correct Jean when he was making mistakes and hit him upside the head when he was making mistakes. So even Jean, who had a very, very positive relationship and reputation with the community, his father was still kind of his shadow watching everything he did. So, you know, and Jean, of course, deferred to his father in every occasion. As ritual meaning reacts to the influx of new religious agents, so too do the social effects of ritual. The same ritual that legitimizes foreign spiritual seekers and allows them to perform initiations and spiritual services for economic benefit also makes them part of a family, defined not by blood, but by initiation. The initiator becomes their parent, and the foreign initiate is often expected to contribute financially to family funerals, weddings, and births. There is no doubt that these international networks encourage Beninese to initiate foreign spiritual seekers. Romar, Jean's eldest son, once confessed to me, "I know more about Fa than all my brothers, but Auguste is the smartest. I worry that he'll be able to take over for our father one day simply because he speaks French better than me, even if he doesn't know Fa as much as I do." Romar often regretted foregoing a school-based education in favor of one that allowed him to focus solely on Fa. In fact, Romar has a lot going for him in a world where his deep knowledge draws in foreign spiritual seekers looking to learn. In contemporary Benin, where spiritual tourism is on the rise and kinship remains socially important, ritual initiation seems to allow for adjustments in ritual horizons as new ritual meanings continue to thrive and to expand outward. As rituals in Vodun take on new global horizons, secrecy becomes especially important to understanding the religion's global expansion. As Paul Christopher Johnson puts it, it is through secretism, the circulation of a secret's inaccessibility, the words and actions that throw that absence into relief, that a secret's power grows, quite independently of whether it exists or not. In this way, processes of secrecy add social power to ritual events and reinforce the value of initiation by increasing a ritual's desirability. In the case of Fa, secrecy is embodied multisensorially as the sacred forest and the human merge. The deliberate and often steady movement into the forest, the smell of crushed leaves and livestock, the ever-present sound of bells, prayers, and ritual songs, the consumption of sacrificial meat, drinks, and kola nuts, and Badu's visual unveiling in the sacred forest. All of these work together to transform initiates and consecrate their authority as diviners. Likewise, the blindfolds, the flushing of an initiate's eye with Badusing, the stark separation from the forest, from the village, the restricted access to the forest, the performed resistance that is overcome every step of the way, and the palm frond barrier that mark the entrance of a sacred forest and its secrets, all of these reaffirm and intensify the power of those secrets that are embedded in the ritual experience. As initiates move closer and closer to the forest secrets, they undergo ontological changes and that prepare them to be a secret holder. Ritual becomes a process by which embodied secrets are manufactured and the way that foreign spiritual seekers develop the community they need to be rendered globally authentic. Through ritual, religious secrecy paradoxically encourages rather than restricts Vodun's transnational flow and presence. As an increasingly diverse set of agents seek divine power from Vodun, not only do West African religious secrets begun to move around the globe, but the performance of secrecy also serves to ceremoniously authenticate, consecrate, and confirm Vodun's grip, not just on a modern West Africa, but increasingly on the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have time for some questions. Questions, comments?
Yes.
Yes, you mentioned a quote where you said, "It is true of secretism that a secret's power grows."
Yes.
You know, so I'm thinking, would you say that Vodun has its potency from the fact that it is secret?
I do think so. You know, if you look at, so when you, let me give you a little bit of linguistics here if you don't mind, because I think it kind of reveals a little bit what's happening. When you reveal a spirit's secret, if I knew a secret of a spirit and I revealed it to you, for example, they would say that the word that they would use to describe that process would be Vodun, which means to shatter the Vodun. It means break, but not break as in you can put it back together. It's like, it was described to me when I was talking to people about this word. He said it's like as if you took a plate and threw it against the table and you couldn't put it back together. That's what that word represents. So the spirits themselves are kind of protected, but if you think of them as somewhat fragile, as the plate, and secrecy protects those the spirits' bodies in many ways, and therefore their power and their ashe. I will say though that the secret, the actual secret, is inconsequential, and it's often public. People know, for example, that masquerades. They know that there's people in the masquerades. That's no secret, but you better never say that in public, that you know that there's a person in that masquerade. So often, learning the secret is often just developing the right, or the ashe, the power and the authority, to admit that you know the secret, rather than actually knowing it. So interestingly, in an international market, this becomes problematic, because foreigners, I can't count the number of times that if I was in the sacred forest when they were initiating a foreigner, for example, and they did the big reveal, and the foreigner's like, what? That can't be real. This is not the secret. What's the secret? No, that's really the secret. You know, just something like, oh, the secret is there's a rock under the pot. That's not a secret. And I said, no, that really is a secret. And they felt like they were being scammed, or they were being lied to. And you know, they kept wanting this big reveal. And the truth of the matter is that what's really important in the process is that process, right? Is the process that surrounds the actual secret, that I'm calling an aura of secrecy, that is paradoxically designed to both resist your ability to enter that aura, and at the same time, ritual is then designed to kind of inoculate you in some ways against that friction. Tourists also find that they need that friction. In a different part of the book, I talk about how tourists were often, if there was no friction or no resistance, they often saw that as a sign of something being inauthentic. So they would be at a shrine. There's this great story I tell where I was with two British tourists, and they were visiting a shrine, and we sat down, and the guy then said, why aren't you taking pictures? Is my shrine not good enough for you? You know, is this shrine not good enough? Why aren't you taking pictures of it? And they turned to me and under the cover of English said, is this place real? Is this a real, why are they allowing us to take pictures? So there's this kind of paradox where the tourists want the resistance because the resistance authenticates the secrecy as real to them, but they also want the ability to navigate through it. And they're often willing to pay thousands of dollars for the ability to do that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
A couple of questions, actually. We learned from diviners like one day Bimbola that in Ife tradition or that area, there's a long process of study before initiation. Many years. And initiation is really just a kind of
broad knowledge, yeah.
So, is that the, is it, did you have a period of study before your
I did.
ceremony, and is that parallel? And then my second question is, you described the mound in the forest that kind of represented the Ifa trade.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was pretty interesting, because where I stay in Nigeria, in the Cross River area, I've seen people do Ifa-style divination, and there is no trade, they just use the ground.
On the ground, yep, it's very common.
Because ancestors talk correct that, so can you...
Yeah, I can talk about both of those.
About that, please?
So the training thing is really fascinating right now. It used to be that you would spend years, your whole young adult life, studying Ifa verses, and you have to replicate those verses and repeat them, and study and memorize these things. And I'll tell you that even among Beninese, that's becoming increasingly rare because of school, because oftentimes families are favoring a school-based education because of global pressures and are sending them to school, and that precludes them from learning. Foreign spiritual seekers sometimes come with zero knowledge, knowing nothing. Before I initiated, I was able to identify all 256 signs on site, and I knew a couple little things about each one, but it was very rudimentary. I mean, August, who was 14 years old, knew much more than I did, for example. That being said, there's this kind of interesting phenomena that's happening among Beninese people. There was one time that I was at a diviner, receiving divination, as I often did to kind of talk to diviners, and he was about in his early 30s, somewhere in there, late 20s, early 30s, and he divined, and the sign that opened up, and I don't remember which one it was, but he didn't know what it meant. So he said, hang on one second, and he went to the back of the house, and he came out with William Bascom's book, Ifa Divination. Okay? And he flipped through the book, and he came to the sign, and he read what Bascom said that sign was. There's all kinds of problems with that. I mean, first the problem is that Bascom's work was in Ile-Ife, and it creates like this Ile-Ife-centric idea of the way that these signs work. And they vary dramatically, often from town to town to town. It's an oral tradition, and what one group sees, recognizes within the power of that particular Odu, another one may not. So there's this kind of additional layer where Beninese people also aren't really learning like they should. Jean's response to that is that he would often, with his own children, they would learn, they would sit and watch him divine. And then once he was comfortable that they knew the signs and could actually recognize them and actually pray with them, then he would start talking about giving them access to other sets of knowledge. So he had some kids, for example, his oldest son is in here, but I mean that Romar's his oldest current apprentice. His oldest son's at university. He's initiated and knows nothing of nothing. So it varies dramatically. The question about the fateh being on the ground, the only time I've ever seen it in that very particular way, where they actually create a ledge, is in the forest. And there are certain secret things buried underneath it to empower it. And the diviner is sitting on another mound of dirt that also has things buried in it to empower that. And they're casting their destiny into the sacred forest, or onto the floor of the sacred forest. And if you kind of, as I said in the paper, when you stop and think about it, there's something really powerful about putting your destiny in the floor where hundreds of people, of generations of your family have done before you. So there's something kind of accumulative and ephemeral about that kind of space. There are diviners who will just cast on the ground. There was a time when I was with Jean in town, and he got a phone call that from somebody, a Beninese person who needed an emergency divination. And he sat on the side of the street and did it right there. He had stuff in his pocket, and he cast divination on the side of the street. On his cell phone, yes. He's also done divination over Skype, too. He's doing it over the phone. So yeah, it happens. And you'll find that the more money people have, the more inclined they are to kind of have these very elaborately carved accoutrements.
Could be translated power, rise.
Ashe.
Oh, Ashe, okay. Yeah, but it's, something just struck me as you said it. But that is probably at the root of, it's not only in West Africa, at the root of religious thought. Because if you go back, the same confusion is there in John chapter 1, verse 12, exousia in Greek. So over the years, I mean, the translation has been, for all that believe in Jesus Christ, he gave them the power. Some translations say, or he gave them the right,
Right.
or the privilege.
Right.
So you find, when it comes to that spiritual ownership and power, you find this duality going all the way, I mean, even in Greek, because that's why,
really
if you go back and say John chapter 1, verse 12, the Greek word, John chapter 1, verse 12, exousia, right? So King James, the old King James translated, he gave them the power to become, the new King James says he gave them the right,
Oh,
then the
interesting.
NIV, so usually three words are used to translate that Greek: power, right, and privilege.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that probably it goes back to something in the primordial times, how
Yeah.
religious right and thoughts or spirituality
You know,
was thought about. So I just wanted to,
Well, it's interesting when you think of like spiritual tourists because many of them are saying stuff like, well, I have the initiation and I've been given the power,
yeah,
so now I must, by definition, also have the right to do this initiation. But Africans themselves believe that right comes slowly as Ashe builds and as power builds.
it's
So,
the
yeah,
same thing. So
yeah.
once you believe in Jesus Christ, if you have been initiated, so to speak, but John says, for as many as believed in him, which is like who come into the faith,
Right.
he gave them the exousia, which is translated the power, the right, the privilege to
Interesting.
become children of God.
That's really interesting.
So it's very interesting that the same quote unquote duality or confusion goes all the way.
Yeah, that's
When
interesting.
a different form of initiation also. Then I observed the palm front. I don't know if you observe it, because when they use palm fronts in West African religion, if, maybe you didn't mention it, if you look very carefully, and you didn't comment on it, I saw it, they are not the same palm fronts, which is very important. Maybe let's say go ask them, because if you see the palm front that are just breaking open, the youngest one that are more yellowish,
That's what they're using.
yeah, but not this one. This is different. So if you have to have go back and look at it, right? There's a difference. One is more powerful.
Can I turn this light off? Just a second?
Yeah. One is more.
Sorry, I know you're-
Yeah. One is more powerful. One weighs off evil forces, and it's all through West African religion that you see the okay.
You're talking about this?
The one that is more greenish
Uh-huh.
is older when they cut it.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, the lighter. You see, no. So this is not this one. This is older. Yeah, you see. So that is the one that is actually more powerful than that most spiritual force. And see, so if you ask them, they will be able to tell you. See, if you see the ones on the right or left, you see they are older, the greenish one, and it goes from there to the yellowish. Then the one directly at the door, you notice, is much more lighter. Which means that you go there the day you are vested, which is even on all through West African religion where this is done. The youngest one that is just breaking tends to have more power and more weight up. And so you go through this gradation. So the way they are arranged, if you're not trained, you would think it doesn't mean anything. But I'm just saying that you see the way it goes.
That's
So
interesting.
yeah, so that's about West African, the use of the palm front.
So the younger ones are more powerful.
Yeah, that weight off stuff like that. The younger ones, sometimes you put it on your mouth.
This is interesting to me as a former Haitianist because in Haiti, they also, there's a palm tree in Haiti called the royal palm, and they clip that tip of the palm tree off because that's where the leaves unfurl from. And they take that and they shred it and they use it in an initiation ceremony called the Kuri Aizan. This, where Aizan, it's the embodiment of Aizan. And I'm trying to remember, I mean, I was with them when they cut this one. And this one was also a new,
Yeah.
that similar to what I just described, the crown of the palm tree.
Yeah.
And I do not recall being with them when they cut that second one. You notice they don't take them down, by the way. You can see all the old ones from every initiation that they've done behind it. So there's also an accumulation that happens here because they're sacred. So you don't take them down. So they just kind of stay up until
But that's
they
the
come
most
up.
sacred part, the youngest part. So in my language, we have two different names. So you got to know palm leaves enough to know that they have different names.
Yeah.
You don't just call them leaves.
Yeah,
So
that's
the
true.
one that is youngest in my language is jaw. We call it imonomoma. So which is different from just the leaves. So you could have, yeah, so
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
when you put it, then the other thing, maybe that's a real question, I'll come to it. But you see, when you go into that forest and you said they lift up and you look at the stone that is there, just for Badu, and people say they don't, where's the secret, right? The question they ask.
Yeah.
But that's precisely to misunderstand in a way. Because, like Robin Hutton, who did his research in my area, you see, the whole idea of, and I'm just going from one religion that I know, but not the
That's fine, yeah.
Vodun. But the point is that the gods come and go in their names. That's the way you use. And therefore, the way you capture the power of a god and you mobilize, you immobilize that god to be in a particular place to help you, is to have anything, a sculpture or an image. So when that image is revealed to you, you are seeing the secret of the power of that god being immobilized at that place to help, right? So that is where the...
I have an article coming out in Material Religion within the next couple of weeks that talks about just what you're speaking about.
Yeah.
That what they're really looking at is the spirit's body, right? They're looking
Yeah,
at...
that is immobilized in a place. So that is the secret, the ability to immobilize a spirit that could wander everywhere, could be everywhere, in a particular space, and therefore you can have contact with that spirit, and that spirit can help you.
Absolutely.
That is, so when you are exposed to that, that is the secret.
It is,
But if you just see it, if you don't have the philosophical and ontological thought going beyond that object, you say what is this? But finally, my question is the ontological. I want to understand, how does the ritual changes the ontology of the person? I'm a theologian and a philosopher, maybe I understand ontology differently. So I wanted to go, how does performing in it, well, if that is true, that means it also happens in Christianity and other religion, that you go through a ritual. We could also say that it's not unique to this and that. Anytime you go through a ritual, you're ontologically being transformed. But how could that ontological how is that ontological transformation happening?
Yeah. So when I'm talking about ontological transformation, I'm talking about the ways in which people post-ritual can exist in the world. And they have the initiation, very simply, connects and binds the being of the person with the being of this, whatever spirit they're being initiated into. And they, in fact, then become, they start sharing each other's ontologies. And Aisha Belioso de Jesus just wrote about this in her new book, Electric Santeria, where she's talking about a concept that she's calling co-presences, where these particular spirits and humans then occupy a presence together. My point about ritual is that through experiencing secrecy, and what I'm talking about is a slow movement towards the secret, right, of becoming closer and closer to the secret, of moving through the aura of secrecy by the grace of ritual, because ritual allows for that inoculation to happen, to allow you to be inoculated from the dangers of Badu, from the dangers of the forest, to being able to move closer and closer. That afterwards, it changes who you are. It changes the way you exist in the world. It changes your being. I'm a bit inspired in this sense by old theories of religion, such as Victor Turner, who believed that ritual was a transformative process. But I was always struck that ritual doesn't really transform your status in the way that Victor Turner suggested. That if you undergo a coming-of-age ritual and you're 13 years old, and then after the ritual, the newsflash is you're still 13 and you're still a kid. And you're not really a man, right, in the social sense, although ritual is the process that kind of starts that transformation to happen. So I've always seen ritual as something that is transformative, as something that can transform the way someone can exist in space. And when I was developing this thought, I was thinking that ritual in fact transforms us, but doesn't really transform our status as much as it transforms our being in the way that we can move through space permanently and forever. You can forget about Vodun forever after you're initiated. And once you've seen Badu's body, you've seen it. And it can't be unseen. And if I ever, if I quit and I ever go back to Benin and I knew the passwords to get in the forest and I knew the right ways to get in, I could get back in, right? So it's this kind of ontological shift. And what I'm essentially arguing about with the palm fronds, to get back to your original comment, was that the palm fronds, in fact, give the forest an ontology, right? It demarcates it from the rest of the forest and makes it special. That the ways in which that sacred forest exists in space then changes the way that people can exist in space once they move through it.
Okay.
So the word that they use to talk about initiation is fazunyi, which means to receive the forest, to receive the. So when they're talking about initiation, they're talking about receiving the forest. And I was really thinking about them receiving the forest, not like in a box, but in their bodies, and changing, and that receiving of the forest in their bodies, marked with the palm fronds they get put on their wrists, with the shaving of the head, with all the process that happens, is all designed to meld your ontological being with that of the spirits, and therefore transforming you permanently.
Yeah, I understand that, but see, the problem is, from explanation of what the people you are quoting, at the bottom of that thought, there's a misunderstanding of African ontology. That thought presumes that the ontology of the gods and the ontology of the forest and the ontology of human beings are different. In African ontology, they are not. So, and I've argued this in my book, The Depth and Destiny of Work, African Ontology. What is happening is one ontology is a transition. So it's not it could be a co-presence of the people, but really it's not that, because it's one transition. So there is no separate ontology, and in the same way, if you grow older, you don't need to be initiated to anything. It's assumed that you are growing closer to the gods. The older you are, the more godly it becomes in African tradition, right? So you see that, what is happening is that it's one ontological being, right? So you have human beings, animals, or so, and human beings could fall back if you live a bad life. In your second coming, you could become a goat or something like that. And therefore, if you live a very good life, so there is this transition, and that's why you find out that in Yoruba, in Calabari, Ogun was a man who became a god, right? So it's one ontology, and like it's a gradient, a chain of being, and you transition from one to the other. So I agree with the thought you were saying that there is a transformation of ontological being, understand that. But we have to be careful that we don't think that there are two ontologies that are merging together.
Talking about the ontology of the spirits and the ontology
the ontology of being, the ontology of what they call the ontology of being in that sense of creation, is one long ontology, and people shift from the other. I agree with you, but I'm saying that we have to be very careful so we don't make it at the point as if the ontology of the gods are different, and the ontology of human beings are different, and at some point you merge them. No, it's one ontology, but we are on different scales. And so you are still correct in saying that there's a transformation. But I don't want to see it, because there is a Greek thought and Western thought to think that the ontologies are independent, autonomous units, that due to some interaction, they come together. No, but this is, because the ontology of human beings and the ontology of gods are about the same ontology. But then, the ontology that has different powers of concentration or ashe on it, so that as you go through ritual, as you age, as you get more things, you now transition into a more concentrated power. On that chain, you go, so the gods are on this chain where they have more power, more stuff. But at the same time, the gods, even though they're also dependent on the human being, because the way human beings disempower gods is that once we refuse to worship them, it draws away their ashe, so they lose. And when I was young, they were explaining these things to me, how they used to disrobe God, that like Houghton even had a record say, if the God becomes too powerful, they will tell him from which tree he was carved from. And as a child growing up in my job place, these things were being said, and they actually told me a case where a particular God represented by the shark was at one time made to not be a god again, which is in a very Christian thought is difficult. You can never make the Christian God not to be a god again. But because of this one ontological being. So, and I thought that was a legend. I was doing my research in the British Slave Museum in Liverpool, and actually saw a Liverpool merchant who was in Niger Delta, in the Jaw area, we saw when that day happened, that actually they disrobed God, and he recorded it on his in his diary. So I'm saying that is what really convinced me that the Greek ontology of like separate independent beings does not always explain everything. Now I may be wrong in Benin. I'm trying to make my explanation based on my understanding of the Niger Delta.
I appreciate that. And I don't think we're actually saying two different things. I think that my argument is that without ritual, that process that you're describing is really difficult. And I think that Brigitte Meyer, I think, in her book Translating the Devil, has argued that spirits are created through blood ties, and the Christian God severs them. This really interesting quote where she's talking about the ways in which the worship of spirits, or the worship of the Vodun, allow people to reinforce their families. And when you are Christian, then your families get reimagined through congregational families, right, through churches. And in that sense, it does in fact change your ontological being. It changes the way you are. So if you haven't been initiated, or you've completely rejected your spirits of your family, then do you ever really achieve that ontology that you're talking about, that ontology that gets closer and closer to God as one ages? As one dies, are they really ever close to God? Or does Christianity or conversion obliterate that and completely make that impossible? And I would say it does make it impossible.
Yes.
So I don't think we're saying the different things here. I think that, I actually agree that the ontological structure of people, the forest, and of the spirits are so intertwined that we might as well consider them similar. But people can, in fact, remove themselves from that ontological structure by converting to Christianity or by converting to Islam. So in that sense, when I'm talking about separating these ontologies into different ways, I'm doing it analytically. I'm doing it as a way of kind of thinking about how ritual actually helps people achieve the ontology that you're talking about when one gets older. And yes, in some cases, an apotheosis occurs, where they become gods. Chang'o is the spirit that I think you're thinking of. When he dies, he transitions and becomes an Orisha. Happens in Haiti too, where people, and really important people in Haitian history, converted and apotheosized into gods, right? So yeah, I think we're saying similar things. Yeah.
I have a question. In your article, you reference people who have converted from Vodun to Christianity. Given what you were just exchanging about, how does that work?
Yeah.
Or Christians who are also being initiated, sort of undercover.
Did I mention that in that check? I can't remember.
Yeah, in the article.
In that article, did I mention the priest who was initiated?
Yes.
In that one, yeah. So yeah, people are doing this undercover, where they're seeing that precisely what we're just talking about here. That if he doesn't initiate, it disrupts his ability to kind of achieve that the connection to his family and the kind of the old ontological being that you're talking about, right? So they do it under cover of night, where they initiate. In the case of converting into Christianity, or the other way around, it's complicated. People who are the case that I wrote about in the article. She was a Vodouizant. Her family is a very strong Vodun family, and she was dying. She thought dying from witchcraft, and she went to the spirits, and she kept dying, and the doctors kept saying she's going to go, and then she, at a last-minute effort, went to Christ and said, "Heal me," and Christ did, and in fact, she has, in many ways, rejected her entire family, and she has her nuclear family. She has her children and her sisters who live in the same compound, but for the most part, her extended family has completely rejected her for this. So there's a lot of risks involved. There's a lot of social risks involved. What's more, this has been happening for so long, though. I mean, Brigitte Meyer wrote about these same kind of things in the 90s. What I think is far more interesting is the reverse, when Christian families are converting into Vodun as a result of tourism. I talk about that woman who was
Right,
from a
with the tour
Luso,
guide.
a Luso-Brazilian family, or Luso-African family, who was raised Catholic. She went to the University of Ghana, so she spoke English fluently. And because she spoke English and French and Fon and Yoruba, she got a lot of tourists who came to her. She was one of the few people in town who could speak English. And as a result of that, people started asking her, oh, can you tell us about Sakpata, right? Sakpata is the god of the earth and of smallpox. And she would be like, I'm not saying that name out loud. She had this kind of fear about Sakpata. But then the tourism kept encouraging her, oh, can you just go in there and ask them this or ask them this question? And she was just repulsed by the idea of going in. And I met her in 2006. And then when I came back in 2009, she was like, oh, by the way, I'm a Voduno now. And I'm like, when did this happen? And we started having these really long conversations about why it happened. And she really was talking about how she was inspired by tourists and that she found a lot of power within it. But interestingly for her, it doesn't have the same risk. You would think that people would reject her, but she can still go to family events. She doesn't have a Vodun last name. Her last name is a Portuguese last name. So she doesn't have those kinds of familial issues that the other woman has, because she still goes to her family house. And she's a Voduno now, but and people tease her about it. They give her a hard time about it. When we were talking about it once, her mother, who is a very strong evangelical Christian who converted from Catholicism to evangelical Christianity, we were leaving one day, and her mother was heckling both of us about going to a Vodun ritual. And as we were leaving, I said to her, I said, doesn't this bother you? And she says, no, she's a Jezunsi, right? When you say like somebody who's initiated into the Vodun are called Vodunsi. And somebody who's initiated into Ogun or Gu in Fawnland would be a Gusi, right? So she's saying, oh, she's just a Jezunsi, right? And that's what her Vodun requires. Her Vodun requires her to be obnoxious about us going to rituals. That's okay. So they've kind of reimagined, in some ways, Jesus as a Vodun.
I find it really interesting that you can't do two things at once. You can't be a Christian.
Oh, you can.
Also,
Most people do.
Okay, so I'm thinking of North Africa spirit possession. You can be going into a trance 1 minute, and then you go off and do your Muslim prayers the next minute. It's not one or the other. Yeah, so
I'm creating an artificial boundary that's built on what people claim that they do publicly. Like, what would you say? What religion do you practice, or more accurately, who do you worship?
Sure.
They'll choose one typically, but in the case of Nafi, who I wrote about in that article, as far as I know, she is one of the people who does not at all touch Vodun. She won't even eat sacrificial meat that has been killed for Vodun. She won't go to any diviners or anything like that. There are people, Catholic, there are priests who become initiated. There are people who, I know many people who talk about religion as a weapon of sorts and say stuff like, well, I can go to church and have the Vodun to protect me from witchcraft. Interestingly, what really drives people to convert often focuses around witchcraft and sorcery, a fear of witchcraft. So Christ allows them to protect themselves from witchcraft in an inexpensive way. So Vodun is expensive, killing goats is expensive, killing chickens is expensive, praying to God is not. One woman even said to me when I asked her about why is she going to a diviner and going to church, and I asked her, do you believe in the Vodun if you're going to the diviner? And she said, I'm too poor to believe. I'm too poor to believe in that, so I go to church, right? So, so these people talk about having, one person even said, use the kind of the cliche of having 2 bullets in my gun. I have 2 weapons to fight against danger. And they don't, so I think your question, I thank you for asking it, because it's really important to note that these boundaries that I'm somewhat kind of creating for heuristic reasons for this conversation are in fact somewhat artificial, because they're very, very porous and people are moving in between them quite a bit.
And also, what do people think about you revealing the secrets?
I'm not revealing secrets. I revealed nothing.
Wait a minute.
I revealed nothing. Yeah, I revealed nothing. I didn't reveal any secrets. What happened in the room, everything that I revealed, that I talked about today, is essentially public. And it happens publicly. What happens inside that room, I did not talk about at all. That's the secret. And I also, the way I deal with this in my writing is often I move ritual. So I have a fear of my work becoming ritual manuals for foreign spiritual seekers like Bascom. So I've rearranged things in the ritual process to put things in different orders. I often will change ingredients names. Like instead of using, if I said a goat hide, maybe they really used a leopard hide, or if I said leopard hide, maybe they really used a goat hide. When it's analytically possible to do that, I will switch things out to kind of protect those secrets and stuff like that. So yeah, but nothing that I talked about today was at all secret.
Secrets,
and
the whole thing is secret to non-initiates, and then as you go up and up and up.
right, and as you're trusted, mostly you get more
And in
information.
the case where all the so-called secrets are published, which they are in some, like in several Cuban traditions, basically everything is published by Fernando Ortiz or Lady Cabrera.
Yeah.
The secrets are not really the physical aspect, it's how you use it spiritually.
Yeah, that's the other
that
point.
Kind of thing is can't really be written down anyway.
If you want to know how to make Badu, it's out there. Scholars have published the ingredients and the recipes and the ritual. I refuse to write it, but people have written about it. But at the end of the day, I think you're right, that knowing the secret, as I have said, is so, it's not very exciting. I mean, the actual secrets are never really all that earth-shattering. What is really more important is that kind of process. I have made an ethical choice to not publish the secrets. Often Jean would tell me, okay, this is a secret, and I have in field notes marked from here down a secret. So I have those kinds of notes to not write about those things. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are people who have taken, scholars who have taken different approaches to this. Some people have disclaimers at the front of their books. There are secrets in this book. If you are of this group, don't read any further. I mean, I think that people have done all kinds of things about secrecy. My biggest fear of my work, because I'm working with spiritual tourists in some way, is them they've taken my work like they've taken Bascom's work and start using my descriptions of rituals as a manual. So there are parts of the ritual that I talked about today that I've left out. One, because they weren't analytically important to what I was talking about, so I've kind of left them out. But I've also left them out for the other reason, that is just to kind of make sure that my accounts aren't actually complete for that reason.
What I think is so interesting about this work is that so many times we read about these African rituals and we're sort of taught, it's almost like there's a canon, right? And there's a codified approach to ritual, and there's no variation. But as you illustrated so well, and everybody's been to Africa sees there's so much variation, right? Depending on the person, the time of the day, the actual community, where it's located. And I love the fact that your work really illustrates that.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's something that I noticed. Tourists like to come with their little notebook and, okay, tell me how to make Badu. Tell me, and they start writing down ingredients. And then they go to the next priest, and they're like, wait a minute, your list doesn't match this list. And they're like, yeah, well, we do it 2 different ways. And they're like, how is that possible? How can you do it 2 different ways? And there are things that I kind of call skeletons, where they must be there. For example, you can never make obatala without efun chalk, without kaolin chalk. It's just not obatala at that point. You can't make it with charcoal. That would be horrible. That's not even imaginable to make obatala, the orisha of, I can't even really say that, right? So there are things that exist, but certainly the ways in which people put these spirits together materially vary so much, and they're so dramatically different, and that actually has caused a lot of tension among tourists, where if their list, if I go to this priest and he gives me this list of ingredients and this one gives me this list, then one of them must be scamming me. Right, so then these kind of post-colonial racist politics.
You said they like tension. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but how about also the need to document this thing? Because there was a time people were afraid these things were going to get lost.
Yeah, there's
in part
that
of
too.
Christianity. So where is the need to document this thing? It's not a way of revealing secret, but the question is, this knowledge needs to be a way that it could be passed on from generation to generations, because in many cases they've been lost because people didn't record it. They are especially under the impact of Christianity and Islam, right? They've been lost. So there's also the need to see if somebody has access to it, does it also need to be secure, to be written down?
Yeah.
So that is also.
It's dynamic, so why write it down?
No, it's not a question of whether it's dynamic or not, because it also needs to be written down so it could be taught. Because you can't have a religion if it's completely oral, because the question, like I was having this debate with somebody, why is, anytime people talk about world religion, they don't put African religion as part of it, but it's very global, right? Because they'll say, wait, there's no text to it, there's no this and that. So there is these two needs, right? Yeah, to do what you do, and in terms of recording it for posterity and for teaching it, and also the need to keep it secret, right? And so there are two tensions. I wouldn't say that going anywhere is fundamentally wrong. It depends on the author's choice, right? To do what, because those things need to be preserved. The knowledge of those things needs to be preserved in a way that the future generation, because what is happening in most of these cultures that the way these things are done has been completely lost. So, I mean, even if Christianity went through this period, there was a time when Christianity was a secret, Gnostics or so, they would deal with their secret, but there was another part that wrote it down. So why, when it comes to African religion, why must it be only one part to the truth?
Yeah.
If you go through Christianity, went through this period of things are oral and secret, you can't do it, or so, the Gnosis and every part of it, the secret religion, then we have the part that is written down. So I'm saying that, so these processes have gone through so many religions at the encounters writing. Right? So I don't think that anybody can say one is I will leave it for each author to do what he or feels comfortable, because Africans need that knowledge to be quantified.
Africans, Beninese people, I should say, are attending to this in different ways.
Yeah.
Some of them, there's a priest called Garbo Hono. Hono is like the owner of the sea. People call him the supreme chief of Vodun in Benin, although it's very contested. But he, for example, his family is believed to have been descended from a whale who could turn into a man, and he took wives and had children, and those children are a result of the people who can then be the priest of that particular spirit. He believed that his ancestors could breathe underwater, that they had a power to breathe underwater. And because of Christianity, that's been lost, because people converted, and with them, when they converted, they took the secrets to breathe underwater with them. So in his house, he has something that, I can only describe as a spiritual laboratory, where he has like a notebook, and he's like putting ingredients together and trying to recreate and duplicate this recipe and trying to refine the magical power. It's almost like a magical chemistry lab where this didn't work, let me make more, and he's really behaving like a scientist in many ways, trying to recreate it. Other families have created, there's no other word for it other than a grimoire, where people have like actually taken notebooks and written down recipes, their family recipes, for shrines or for magic. Magic seems to be the thing that's most guarded as a recipe than anything else. The ability to turn invisible, the ability to translocate, the ability to win money, chances at games of chance, these kinds of bulletproof, these sorts of things. And they have grimoires of recipes. Many times I was offered by multiple families, here, you want to buy this? I'll Xerox our family grimoire for you. For $1,000, it's yours. I never bought one, although I had really interesting conversations with people about the politics of why they're writing it down. Because like you, my reaction is, well, it's dynamic. Why are you writing it down? And there's a real fear, like for Jean, for example, he has, I don't know how many kids, many. And of those kids, over 10, 2 of them are really interested in Fa, and the others are not. So he has 2, they're all initiated, but only 2, and really only 1 is, because 1 is still very young. Romar, who's in his late 20s by now, I would think, is the only one who's really up to kind of taking the mantle. So, he had definitely more than 10 children before he, has 1 out of all those kids who are willing to kind of take up the mantle. So I hear what you're saying, that there's a fear that even though they're dynamic, that there's a fear that their kids just don't want it, because to them it's not modern, it's not part of the modern world, and they worry about that. Romar once told me, he said, you know, I asked him, what did you think about white people coming here to be initiated? And he says, I love it. It means the missionaries were wrong. It means that what we're doing isn't evil. It means that what we're doing isn't bad. The world actually wants this. So it's encouraged me to want to be a diviner more, because now I'm not afraid that what I'm doing is not modern. If you guys can do it, then we can do it too, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of post-colonial racial politics in that discussion, which are worth noting, but certainly I think that people are dealing with the politics of writing things down in very different ways, and ultimately, I'm an anthropologist, and I'm interested in the ways in which they choose to do it. And, you know, I don't want to be a participant in that. I want them to kind of make those decisions and them to choose those things.
I think we should close now. I mean, we can certainly continue offline.
Great.
But thank you very much.
Thank you
Really
so much.
appreciate it.
Thank you.